Hey friends, Ari Koinuma here. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to continue our series on recording studios by talking through the decisions of the monitor or the speaker and microphones. So these are two of the biggest pieces of the studio as far as the gear is concerned, and they're kind of sexy things, so it's really fun to talk about them. But it's also very highly personal, and there are lots and lots of great choices out there. So the question is, how do you navigate the choices and find the one that you think will be fitting for your needs and preferences and taste? So one trick that I have as far as like gear evaluation is big retailers like Guitar Center have a fairly generous return policy. So I bought stuff from them by basically ordering 2 or 3 final candidates and have it at home and compare them side by side, and then returned the ones that I didn't want. I think that's really practical for those of us who are on budget. As far as the monitor speakers are concerned, the goal of monitor speakers is that we want them to represent your recordings accurately, right? And that is different goal from saying that I want music to sound good. If the speaker kind of makes everything sound too good, they can mask or cover up qualities that you should really fix in the mix or even when you're recording. So accuracy and details and transparency, or how revealing they are of problems that exist in the recording, it's pretty important. So it is different from other sort of listening evaluations. Or if you're into like a home audio, or if you want to have like a decent speakers, you might look for a piece of gear that makes the kind of music that you want to listen to sound good, right? But for monitor speakers, what you're wanting is that sort of the revealing nature that will sort of show is a funny word for something you listen for, but that will show you where the problems may be. And to do that, how you want to evaluate, ideally, again, is to be in the environment where you will be using the speakers, because the environment does affect the sound. And then you want to have a set of recordings, the reference recordings. I mean, this is a technique that's been discussed among the audio circles, so you might have seen other people talk about this. But you want to have a set of songs or recordings that you consider is like your ideal or your gold standard in the genres of the music that you want to produce, and songs and recordings that you're very, very familiar with, right? And so that you can use that to evaluate which speakers sound most revealing to you, that you might notice. Well, the thing that you might be looking for is to listen to these speakers and go, oh wow, I noticed this and that quality that I didn't notice before, right? That's a sign of good studio monitor speakers, because that means that, again, it has details and revealing quality that is sort of exposing your ears to something, that some characteristics or some qualities that you've never heard before, you didn't notice before. Speakers are something that you don't want to change very often, because the point of monitor speakers is that you know how it sounds, how it reacts to different recordings, so that when you're mixing it or when you're evaluating takes, you know what to expect. Like, for example, I'm still using the very first pair of speakers that I bought many years ago. These are Event Drea systems. They have a subwoofer down there. But it's not the greatest speakers. I'm sure that there are comparable and better speakers by now at the same price range. But I know how these sound. I can tell you that the sibilance is kind of overly harsh with this one. I hear some sibilance that goes shh with these speakers that I don't hear on any other speakers. So I can kind of let go. For example, if some of my sibilance is a little bit sound too much on these. There are certain upper mid-range frequency that feels kind of harsh. And then there are certain dynamic range, especially with 24-bit recordings, where I wish that it revealed a lot more of the soft to loud dynamics. But I know these speakers, and as tempting as it is to look at other better speakers, I've not learned how to work with them, and I'm pleased with the results, so I just can't be able to justify getting new speakers. So take your time. Ideally get your speakers in the environment where you listen to. I mean, if you can't, obviously you might have to listen to in somebody else's studio, in the store and things like that, or you might even, well, you can read like interviews of engineers or producers that you admire and see what they're using and stuff like that. That's helpful, but still I would consider that more of a research to narrow down to the final, one or two candidates, and then you should really try it in your environment. Alright, the next conversation, and this is probably the most hotly discussed topic as far as studio decisions, is the microphones. The microphones are the guitars of the recording studio, and people love to debate them and talk about them. But actually, I only use these two, and most often just this one. I find that, well, with the kind of music that I make, I also end up doing a lot of direct recording, so that's part of the reason why I don't have a huge variety of instruments, live instruments that I record through a microphone. It's mostly my guitars and my voice, so that's part of the reason why. When you're getting started in the recording business, what the difference that engineers describe between different microphones may seem really, really subtle, and you may have to do side-by-side recordings and compare them like right after one after another to be able to say, oh yeah, okay, so they do sound different, right? And generally speaking, what you're going for is, when you record a take, without doing anything to it, you listen to it in the speakers, and then possibly with the other instruments that are already recorded, so you can hear in the context of the mix more or less. And you want to go for the microphone and the take that sounds just good to you without tampering anything. That is like the basic rule. So let's just cover just a very broad stroke, and you can poke holes at them, but it is helpful to have the broad stroke, big picture of what different microphones do. So the most affordable kind and simplest kind of microphones are dynamic microphones, and I'll let other people explain how they're constructed and how they work and stuff like that. From my perspective, dynamic microphones sound very, how should I say, they're kind of like have a coarse, crude character to it, which really serves certain type of sources like electric guitar amps, or like a male rock vocals, for example. Those are sort of instruments where the sort of the more brute is a little strong, but just, yeah, the coarse, not so fine kind of quality of dynamic microphones really fit the kind of sound that you want. Whereas large or small diaphragm microphones, this is a large diaphragm microphones, they are a lot more detailed, and therefore they sound more refined and just gentler, I would say. Of which the small diaphragm microphones are probably more neutral sounding one. They really don't add characters to your sound, and therefore you see them used in like classical music recordings. Now, if you're making popular music though, neutral is not always the best because they can sound kind of sterile and boring. small diaphragm microphones are good for like acoustic guitars. I consider getting one for my acoustic guitar too, but I just have been using these large diaphragm microphones. Large diaphragm microphones are more for giving the sound a certain character, and they all seem to just have this or that sort of a color that they add to the sound. And then if you add the right kind of color that matches and serves the source and in the context of the music, that really goes a long way toward making your mix sound great, because you won't have to do as much fiddling with the sound in the mix stage, and the less fiddling you do in the mix, the better generally. So large diaphragms, they are kind of subjective, and that you have to kind of try a few of them. And so remember that try a few and return trick that I mentioned earlier, right? It will really come in handy with large diaphragm microphones. This is a ribbon microphone, and ribbon microphones are kind of particular in that they, to my ears, they sound very natural, but ribbon, because of its design, has a very boomy low end, so it can sound very muddy. But I've really grown to like ribbon microphones, because compared to like the large diaphragm, I don't know, they just strike me as like very natural and fast. Fast is a funny word to use, I realize, but it just seems like the sound comes like just without very much tampering to it. But it's not the same thing as being neutral either. It just has a particular feel that makes me go, oh yeah, that sounds very pleasing in a sort of a non-hyped way. But the thing about microphones is it's just more is not always the better, and in fact more expensive is not always better either. It just, you want to buy just enough and learn how to use it really well with things like positioning of the microphone and such, and you get a lot of mileage out of them. So microphone in particular is a place where you could get stuck because there are so many choices. Again, the goal is to get something that is good enough in your price range that you can get to know and work with. So I would say that don't go crazy looking at every single microphone. Just read producers, engineers that you respect, and see what kind of microphones they use, and use that as a starting point for your research. And then again, hopefully once you narrow down your candidates, you can just buy a few and then try it out and return the ones that you like the less. Okay, so that's all I have to say about the speakers or microphones. I hope you find this sort of a talking through of the decision making helpful. If you have any questions or comments, or if you agree or disagree, please let me know in the comments and I'll respond as I can. Alright, thanks again. I'll see you next time.